Hello, all. Welcome to Progressive Washington, hosted by Uphill Media. Today, we're going to talk about this concept of what it looks like to have a united left front. Some have called it Party X, and I mean, it has a lot of names over the years and been worked towards from so many fronts. But this conversation was just to bring a couple of people together who had this idea independently, and the various angles on what that would look like. With us today, we have Akua Walters, is formerly of the National Progressive Party organization, is now a freelance activist. We have Noah Martin of the Green Party. He is a member of the coordinating committee and a national delegate. And we have Cait McGinnis, who is one of the front humans for the hashtag United Left movement, I believe board of the Rose Caucus. But I'll let you guys introduce yourselves. Yeah, I'll keep it that brief. Can we go straight to Akua? Akua, you want to start off and tell us who you are and where you're coming from with this idea of Party X? And I'll note also that in my world, you were the person who coined this idea of Party X. And if that's, I don't know if that's originally yours or not, but I'd love to hear where that came from too. But just give us a little intro on yourself, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take the credit for Party X. So what had happened was at the end of the Bernie Sanders 2020 campaign, I started fishing around the political left for a party to embed myself in, or rather an organization to embed myself in order to work to unite the different factions on the left, right? So I started off with the Greens, and then I eventually matriculated into the NPP. And like you just highlighted a second ago, Tyler, the NPP, I'm no longer affiliated with the NPP, and I still hold the idea of Party X, which is essentially working with all of the factions on the left to come together at a kind of a convention to dissolve their parties and form a brand new party. I think Nick Brana and Cait's organization, United Left, has a lot of these same ideas.
Yeah, cool. And so, to be clear, you're no longer affiliated with the National Progressive Party, so that lower third was from last week and not technically correct. I have a lot of questions for you, Akua, and we'll get back to you a bunch. But let's get everybody else introduced. Cait, would you go next and just tell us who you are and where you're coming from?
Hi, I am Cait McGinnis. I am the digital communications coordinator for United Left. Basically, we're just a group of people. It started out with some friends of mine and I talking about this need for, a way to try and reduce the amount of, infighting that is, harmful to us while allowing our various groups and organizations to still have autonomy. And, we had talked before, and I had heard this conversation about the Party X, and I think that's a great idea. Our point at United Left is to just get these groups and organizations even talking, because I think a lot of the differences that, we focus on so much aren't really as substantial as we think they are when you talk about the broader scheme of stuff. So, it's just a group of random people. I know that I haven't been involved in politics nearly as long as some of the other people who are here today. But it's been really nice to see, the amount of support that people have given this idea and the amount of time that everyone has put into United Left. And I think, again, we're saying the same thing. The idea is coming from everyone. I just think the largest, hurdle right now is just getting past, personal reasons why party so-and-so is better than party, a different party. Because we all want the same thing, generally speaking.
Yeah, good point. And given the events of this past week, we're definitely going to be getting into some of that stuff. And the politics of people are really the big obstacle. How about Noah? You want to jump in here and tell us where you're coming from?
Yeah, sure. My name's Noah Martin, and I use he/him pronouns. I am a national delegate for the Green Party of Washington and a member of the coordinating council for the Green Party of Washington, which means that I basically represent the state party on the national level to the national organization. And I joined the Green Party in 2016 after working on the Bernie Sanders campaign, and for the it was I actually worked on Dennis Kucinich's campaign, his final campaign in 2012. Saw a few pretty nefarious things through the course of that, and Bernie brought me back and continued to see the same thing. So I joined the Green Party. And I guess I just say that I came in 2016 mostly to point out that I come from a perspective that isn't very bound to a lot of these very old disagreements. I don't have a lot of baggage or history with the Progressive Party or Socialist Alternative or any of these other organizations that we would of course have to be working with in Washington. And so I'm very much interested, for me, the priority really needs to be actually achieving democracy in at least Washington state before we can even begin to talk about achieving pushing for our interests as a party, you know what I mean? Like, or as, the values that we want to put forward in government, we need to fundamentally come together with the people who we disagree on, or who we agree with on basic issues like electoral reform, like healthcare, housing. There's no reason in Washington state with our top two system that a united movement could not immediately start winning nonpartisan offices at the municipal level as early as next year. There's no reason that we couldn't pass an initiative next year or in 2022 to have ranked choice voting. But it would require us to actually get our act together and like Cait said, talk to each other. And so I'm really keen to be doing that. I think it's long overdue. And I think at least the Green Party now is really in a position where I think we're really open to a lot of that. And it's at least in Washington state. So that's where I'm coming from. It's sort of as a person who is very active in the state party, has a lot of autonomy because of the Green Party's decentralization, and is really interested in building an independent left party. And Party X, great. We can call it whatever we want.
Yeah. Well, the reason the first time I ever talked to Akua about this, we were, the reason the idea of Party X was one of the big barriers to actually uniting the left is that people are really attached to their banners. People are attached to, the word progressive in the party, the word green in the party. And so the idea was that you agree to work together, and once we've established this democracy, then we're going to name it, and it's going to be later. And so that was one of the kind of core principles behind the concept, as I understood it anyway. But I want to go, let's in speaking of just, kind of the basic steps towards getting this moving, I've heard, Cait, I believe I've heard you speak of your group as the glue, the glue between these organizations and the almost a catalyst type organization. And so I want to hear more about what that looks like, because, we have this pie in the sky option of what would it look like if, we merged the Greens, maybe they get major party status with, Vermont Progressive Party's full spectrum of elected officials, plus this real down to earth grit of Shama Sawant and the Socialist Alternative Party. But that's pretty far away right now. But what does it look like on the ground from an organization that is on the ground trying to do this from where we are at now, taking a step forward? What are you seeing? What wisdom can you share with us?
Yeah, so a lot of what we're doing right now, and again, we're a really new organization. We've been around for a month and a half. So this is brand new. But the point behind it is that we have a lot of people reaching out to local and state parties and groups and associations and talking to them about, what we can do for them as an organization in terms of, hey, we're making all these connections. We'd like to share these connections with you. So it's kind of like, we have one person reaching out to so-and-so DSA chapter and a different person, or maybe the same person, reaching out to, the Green Party in that same state. If we're talking to them both, we can say, hey, there's this great event that, DSA is doing. I think y'all should work together on this. And I think that's, going to be our most effective way of making change. I also think it's important that we don't forget that, the only people, the people who matter the most here are the voters, or the individuals, or the citizens. They're not the people who are at the head of these parties. And I know, we get so caught up in like, I don't like so-and-so who's running whatever party. Okay, if you don't like them, and if they're not going to work with us on creating a unified front, put it up to a vote, make a referendum to join a group, to do party X, whatever it is that you think will further us as people, so that my vote matters just as much as, say, a Democrat or Republican voter. Because right now we don't have that. We don't have that option. Green Party is great. It has a lot of, good things about it. Progressive Party has a lot of things about it. I think we're all just trying to tackle this, problem with our democracy from different angles. But what I keep seeing left out of the conversation is talking to people who are, not super political, or who are just, lay people who are members of, say, your local DSA. I think if we come to them with this idea of a party X or some sort of council or coalition, and we put it to a vote, I don't see why people wouldn't adopt it. Everybody that I've talked to about this idea, not everybody, there have been a couple exceptions, but the vast majority of people I've talked to about this idea are on board with it. They support it. The challenges come from the people who are, the leaders in these organizations. But I think what we really need to do is be persistent, keep talking about this idea, stay away from branding, because, we've all had these, 4-hour long pontificating arguments about, why progressive is a great word, why, socialism is a great word. When I think, what we really all want is, we want healthcare, we want housing, we want to be treated like human beings. So that's kind of what I've seen and what I've learned. But also to just keep your eyes and ears open, because there are so many people with great ideas into making this happen. And since we've started this group, we've had members join and say, like, we can be more effective if we do this, if we do that. So just remembering that, like, it's not about us as individuals. It shouldn't be about us as individuals, and it shouldn't be about any leaders as individuals, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. I have so many responses. But I want to be careful not to be too much in the driver's seat on this conversation. Given the amount of respect I have from the guests in the room, I just want to make sure that if you guys have stuff that needs, if you know where this conversation should go, please jump in. And if nobody jumps in, I'll keep on asking questions that are pertinent for the various reasons. Please.
Do that? Yeah, I would just respond to what Cait said about leadership. I think I completely agree, and I think that's actually one of the biggest reasons why I think one of the things we really need to be focused on is recruiting leadership that we can all get behind. You know what I mean? That where it's not even. It doesn't become about us, where we're actually, growing people. And I have to say, today is Juneteenth, and we have one person of color on the call, and it's like, that's a really common problem with independent left organizing. Greens are certainly have that problem. If you start an organization entirely composed of white people, or largely white people, you are extremely likely to just stay mostly white people. We need to be immediately reaching out to. I mean, I would really like to have somebody like Nikita Oliver on this call, because she's done incredible work in Seattle and has actually put. I mean, the People's Party, to my knowledge, is pretty diverse. You know, I'd like to be talking with. I mean, here in Olympia, we've been talking a lot with the Protectors of the Salish Sea, who have extremely serious. I would argue are the most serious, potent voices against Jay Inslee in the state, at least from the left. So I think there are voices we really need to be bringing to the table, like immediately, very quickly. So that's kind of, I would like to talk a little bit about that. And I would also like to talk about how, what the sort of strategy is. Because I think that we should work, I think the history of US politics really shows that this kind of thing happens on a state-by-state basis, and that the coalitions are probably going to be different in different locales. It's a very large country. So yeah, that's just, anyway, we can talk about that later.
Noah, so since I left the National Progressive Party, let me give you an idea. Since you mentioned strategy, I feel like it's important to talk about strategy, and then I'll address your comment about diversity in politics and in left organizations. So since I left the NPP, what I've been finding is a lot of the work that I did at the NPP, I still have to be doing, which is essentially going into these different states, talking to these different organizations, figuring out where I can help them consolidate. And the model that I'm working on in terms of getting, because my mission remains the same, right? To get as many leftists and progressives elected at the local level. And the model that I'm pushing to a lot of these organizations is what's called coalition campaigns, whereas every district has a certain amount of city, has certain amounts of cities, so they need to run mayors, they need to run district judges, district attorneys, prosecutors. So the idea is to have them share one donate button, have them share one office. Everybody gets their own campaign manager, and we kind of figure out at a local level where we can find people like people with like Cait's skill set, with my skill set, who can go out and help to gather the organizers and get the data. Because like what we want to have happen is for as people matriculate into office, we get people, we get to recruit people to replace them if they're going to be leaving office at the end of their term, or if God forbid something happens and we have to run a special election in that district, right? Or for those seats. So as a matter of strategy, that's one of the things that I'm still working on as not particularly affiliated with any organization. In terms of diversity, I think that what's happening is that it's not that Black voices, I don't think that it's that Black voices or Latino voices or diverse voices are stifled at this point. It's that there isn't, I haven't seen at least very much diverse thought amongst the people of color. The left, the people on the left who are Black or Latino, POC, if you will, they tend to gravitate to the Democratic Party for whatever reason. Some of it is tradition, some of it is apathy, and a lot of it is that the organizations on the left do not address issues that actually affect people of color. So we're talking about civil asset forfeiture. We're talking about matters of civil rights. We're talking about $25 minimum wage. We're talking about healthcare. Like a lot of those larger ideas aren't packaged in a way that's accessible to people in diverse communities. So it makes it hard to get them in.
I think your comment about how these various issues that are relevant are relevant to people of color, of, all backgrounds. I think a lot of that is a lack of communication on our part. What I've noticed in my brief time, paying attention, is that one of the biggest hurdles for leftist organizations, progressive organizations, whatever you want to call them, is that they're not funded well enough, and there aren't enough people on the ground doing those communications work, doing that outreach work, and doing it in a way that is professional. I am a graphic designer. I do marketing and PR work for my day job. So I see a lot of the issues, where communication and information dissemination is really difficult, especially if you don't have a site that's run well. And I know that we're so stuck in our anti-capitalist, we don't want to worry about, how pretty things are because it's very utilitarian, but the general public does, especially if you're trying to convince them in a very short period of time that what we're doing benefits their interests. So what I really want to see more of is more artists, more designers, more people with that kind of skill set and the communication skill set volunteering in these groups, and not being afraid to say no, this is important. We need to be spending a significant portion on our budget on outreach. And I think that's part of what we're trying to address, with your idea of sharing offices and doing coalition campaigns. I think that's great. Part of what we're trying to address at United Left is we're trying to make it easier for, say, somebody who's running a campaign or a group, somebody who is running, a direct action initiative, for them to be able to come to us and say hey, we need somebody to help with this thing. Can you guys reach out to your network and find somebody that can fulfill that position? Because, frankly, stuff that is created on MS Paint isn't going to convince a lot of people that you're serious and that, these issues matter. People tend to pay attention to the first, couple seconds, less than a second if you're on a website. And if it doesn't grab your attention, you're just going to go leave, because there's so many things. There's so much content out there. And I think that's one of the things that was particularly effective about the Bernie Sanders campaign, is that I saw, the website was functional, the communications were really clean. And I know we're not trying to prop up Bernie Sanders for another run or anything like that, but I think there are lessons to be learned from there. And it would be helpful for us to reach out to the people who did that, and ask them to do it again, but for our own party. Why are we wasting our time and our skill set on the Democratic Party when it doesn't like us,
Well, to your point, Cait, and Noah, I'll answer Cait after you go, because I see that you were about to speak.
I was just going to say I completely agree with that, and it's especially true in the communities that we really need to be seeking support. Either smaller communities, so rural communities where an organization is not going to have the number of people with skills and even the number of volunteers to be able to really put together a good website, or to those things should really be prepackaged, and that's something that you should just when you start a local, here's we're going to help you make a very professional website.
Here's your package. Yeah, and that's true, Noah.
Yes, and then it's similar, and just the impoverished communities don't have resources for some of these things, a lot of the time, and that's a big way that we can help. I wanted to highlight Cait's point.
Yeah, and just to back up what Cait and Noah just highlighted, that is the idea behind coalition campaigns, right? And we have to develop this idea. We have to develop this idea as the left, because let's face it, we're not understaffed, we're under-resourced, right? And And if we're talking about democratization, like what could be better than the democratization of the election process, of the campaign process, right? Where somebody can say, I want to run for an office, and they can come into a space in their district and, or decide that they want to set up a space in their district. We can come in and help them with all of the things that they need for their campaign. So if they need training, if they need training as a candidate, if they need to understand how Van works, or if we're going to develop, and that's another thing that I've been stressing on for the past 6 months, that we need to build an alternative to NGP to Van. Like the progressive left needs to build an alternative to Van. And I had proposed, and I'm still proposing, even to the United Left, to the Greens, that we come together, we form a cooperative, a worker-owned cooperative, where we hire, where we get people to volunteer their hours in exchange for equity, in building an alternative to Van, where it's the labor is shared, the profits are shared, and we're able to, again, help build coalition campaigns all across this country. Because the fact of the matter is, not every single campaign can afford it. Like we saw a lot of the New York progressives, for instance, having to really like do a lot of these, a lot more campaign events in order to get their names out, and work with AOC and work with a lot of other groups in order to get their name out. Like, what's that group that Kyle Kalinske and Cenk Uygur had founded? Justice Democrats, right?
Yeah,
so like we have to decentralize much in the way the Green Party has done with their structure. We have to decentralize power, whether it's ours or not. We have to decentralize the electoral process, the campaign process, in order to push the progressive agenda.
Yeah.
Incidentally, there is.
You're fine.
I'll just mention that there is that software does exist. The alternative to Van has been written. And what it needs is something like this to activate it. We can go into that later, but go ahead, Cait.
Yeah, I think too, what's interesting to me is the idea that, as opposed to just relying on fundraisers or on donations, I've seen, for example, and I know this is a hotly debated subject because, we are representing the working class and not everybody can afford to pay dues, but I think the idea of dues for people who can afford them is really smart. If we were to create any sort of Party X, any sort of council, anything that was, an overarching coalition, I think it's essential that we ask those people who can't afford it to pay dues, because it's an investment in our democracy. And I don't think that we will be able to survive just on donations.
99 cents for the 99%.
Yeah, something like that, where it's, I'm privileged enough to still like have a job right now. I don't have a lot of money, but I can afford, $10 a month, and we could do it in a way that's like, hey, let's honestly assess how much, income you have and what you can afford as a person, and then have some sort of monthly dues structure, so that, we can actually get some real power. Without money in this country, we're not going anywhere. And it makes me sad to say that, but it's just true. Without the donations, Bernie Sanders' campaign would have been a flop. We wouldn't know who he is today. Well, maybe we would, because we're kind of nerds. But, like the general public, this wouldn't be a household name without advertisement, without marketing. And there are so many misses that we have because we're so concerned about, trying to make things as, low cost as possible, which is great. But sometimes you just got to go in there with a hammer. You can't just rely on word of mouth, because, there's so many people in parts of the country where there are probably zero people who are paying attention to leftist politics, who, live in small towns where, these kind of ideas aren't exactly encouraged. So to get past that barrier, I think the biggest question and the biggest answer is dues. So we can pay people for their labor, because I've noticed that it's really hard to get people to volunteer their time, especially when we are a group of people who are largely working class, with different skill sets. It's really hard for them to say, I've been working 40 hours this week. Let me put in another 5+ hours to volunteer. Well, if you're tired and there's like no incentive, first of all, it's not really fair to expect everyone to volunteer their time, but it also doesn't make sense as an individual to volunteer my time 5 hours unless you're really, really sold on our ideas, and I think Rose Caucus has done a really interesting thing with that, where they're paying people to do all their communications. They're paying individuals, and it's, they're not just talking about how we need fair wages. They're giving people fair wages. And I think that would be a great principle to bring into any party that we create.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. A dues system is essential for a grassroots, people-powered organization, and it's kind of counterintuitive, because people think, oh, well, it's pay to play if it's dues or whatever. But it's really, if you're not going to take corporate money, if you're not going to, accept money from businesses, then it's just like we have to be our own funders, and like that was, of course, the Bernie model. And it's how you can actually have staff. Otherwise, you end up with basically whoever has the most time has the most power in the organization, and that's not good. You need to be able to pay staff to execute the will of membership.
Everybody.
So,
I think too, the idea of dues isn't necessarily classist, as long as you're not forcing your people who can't afford it to pay dues. I wouldn't say that, a family, who is making poverty wages should be forced to do, to pay dues. I think it should be consent based. However, if there is a culture where it's strongly encouraged, and you can afford it, we can trust our members enough to tell, if they are somebody who can afford to pay dues, and just if they're somebody who can't afford to pay dues. I wouldn't want to say like, hey, show me your tax returns to see how much you need to pay in dues. I don't think that's, fair or just, and that's just a form of means testing. But, if you in your individual circumstances can justify that, the fact that it's monthly and recurring, you don't have to think about it every time you dues. It's like a union membership. Somebody has to pay the water bills. And if we don't want it to be, a company, then we kind of have to force ourselves to dig into our pockets if we can't afford it.
I want to steer this towards, and I agree with all of that. And actually, it's a really big deal for me to figure out something that does have self-supporting finances coming in, and also is not prohibitive, and also takes into consideration the fact that most people are too busy to even spend time with their children, let alone volunteer a couple of hours to make Party X work. I want to be real sensitive to that stuff, and I want those people to have a voice, even if that voice is showing up once a year or just receiving a newsletter. But I wanted to get down to some nuts and bolts here, because it's been stated that this whole ground up revolution idea is a really big deal to me. And in the real world, in my own personal experience, I started my political career by founding a political party, and it flopped. And that's kind of expected. The Greens actually said they wouldn't run me. That's how it went down. And so I started the Interdependence Party, looked at the world, and basically gave up after a nominating convention or something like that. And but later, when there was a revolution to work with, a couple interesting things happened. One was that this original coalition idea began practicing how that might look. And so we merged with two different organizations, effectively, with the Washington State Progressive Party and with Our Revolution Washington. And suddenly we had three organizations that were pretty much on the same page as far as their ideology, a little bit different on on the perception of their tack, but you kind of had at least one model for how that might work. Now, I don't think that's the model for everything, because I can't imagine that we would. I mean, I think we're a long ways away from dissolving our banner, the Progressive Party, or dissolving the banner, the Green Party. But I believe we can move towards that in multiple different ways. For example, Washington State is going to be different than other places. The next time we have this conversation, I'm hoping to bring on William Bortfield, who recently just merged the Green Party of Louisiana and the Progressive Party of Louisiana actually merged just now, and that happened, and that's a thing. And I want to talk to people like, as Noah brought up, I would love to get Nikita or whoever the current voice of the People's Party is in the room to talk about what that would look like here in Washington State. And so I want to ask this question directly to Noah. What would it take? Like, I'm the chair of the Progressive Party, and we're totally down to make this work. I'm part of the I don't care what we call a party, really. That's my actual affiliation. What would it take from the Green Party perspective to actually take some step towards having a united front? Like, I mean, are we talking about a referendum here? What would the actual nuts and bolts of making that happen look like from your perspective?
I think the path, as far as the Green Party is concerned, is going to be state by state. That's how most things happen in the Green Party. So I will just talk about Washington. We're granted a fair amount of autonomy, and I sort of look at the model of the Mountain Party, which is the West Virginia affiliate of the Green Party. And you'll notice there's no word green in that. And I think that, to me, sets a precedent. There are other examples that we can essentially, as long as we call ourselves the affiliate for the Green Party, call ourselves whatever we want, structure ourselves as long as we're democratic, within basic framework that I think you all would agree with. But and so that's sort of, I look at it as our state party could. I mean, I hadn't heard about Louisiana. But it could happen, and yeah, it sounds like somebody got ahead of me there. But I don't see any. I mean, there's the Green Rainbow Party in Massachusetts, which also merged with the Rainbow Party, which was based out of Boston, and came out of Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Movement, so we would. We could, as a state party, we would basically, there would be a motion, and it would have to be approved by membership by a 2/3 majority. There would probably be an effort to reach consensus on it before we took a vote. That's pretty difficult given how the numbers we're talking about. So there would be a lot. It would be long. It would be a lot of internal discussion. There would definitely be very distinct principles and values that would have to be reflected in the organization that we were, going into. And the structure would be subject to a lot of discussion. So yeah, you're right. It is a long way away in some ways, but I don't think. I think there are going to be probably some things going on around us that might force us to move a little quicker. And I'm kind of I think that the people will push us, and I don't. I do think that a big question that's going to come up is just our stance on capitalism. The Greens have very recent, not very recently, but have very became an official eco-socialist party in 2016, and we probably we work here in Olympia a lot, mostly with the Socialist Party. That's really the only other third party that is active here. So, that broadens our coalition. But it is a question when it comes to founding principles of an organization. So I don't want to get too into that right now, but I just
it's an important point. It's a very important point.
It's a two-thirds majority, but the national wouldn't really get in our way. I don't think that's sort of the way I look at it.
Right.
Yeah. I think the question I keep hearing in regards to how we create this united front is how, what are the extremes that we are willing to accept? Are we going to, what is the furthest right that will allow on our coalition? And some people, interestingly, have brought up, creating ties to people who identify as libertarians, who are not socialists, but who agree on, issues, for example, like, I don't know,
War and Peace.
Yeah, for anti-imperialism. Like how much are we willing to align with somebody with different viewpoints and opinions on capitalism for the end goal of, say, for example, ending all of the wars? And how much are we compromising in a way that hurts ourselves? And how much are we compromising in a way that doesn't really even feel like a compromise, where it's just, hey, we're going to work with you on this one issue, but everything else we can butt heads about. So that's the discussion I keep hearing. I think personally, in my opinion, I'd rather that, in our coalition, people who are at least skeptical of capitalism in its current form, at least people who are, people who want somewhat of a market economy, I think would be welcome in any sort of coalition that I'd be fine with. But I can't speak for the people who identify as communists. I can't speak for, all those people. I think the way that we would find that line is we'd have to vote on it. I think we'd have to say, this group wants to join with us, either for this issue or in general. And I think it would have to be a referendum. And in my opinion, going issue by issue and finding alignments based on issue is still something we should do. Anti-corruption initiatives with people who identify as libertarians, as well as, anti-imperialism, fair democratic practices. If we can agree on the nuts and bolts of those issues, I think it'll be a smart idea. And that's how coalitions are made in parliamentary systems. I want our country to basically run like a parliamentary system,
Yeah, we can. Most of the, especially the third party coalitions, all these people agree on some basic things. Proportional representation is one of them. Alternative voting, getting first past the post. War and Peace actually is, everybody outside of the middle agrees on that stuff. I want to be careful not to go too long here. This is a lot of just dialogue, but I don't want to. I want to hear everything that you people have to say. So speak up quick. We're probably going to wrap up within the next 5. I'm guessing, certainly within the next 10. I did want to touch a little bit about, make some motion if you guys have anything that you want to jump in with before I switch the topic a little bit. This issue, that we saw a lot this weekend, have seen so much over the years of egos tearing the left apart, is, besides banners and just literally disagreeing on the path to the summit, the big issue really seems to be people politics. And I know that we collectively have a lot of experience in this, in the trials and tribulations of trying to do anything useful in the world here. And I'm just wondering if anybody has anything to share, regarding the, how NPP, the National Progressive Party, seems to have yet a third schism and is scattering to the winds, so to speak. Or with the Green Party, it was, the Seattle faction versus the South Sound faction. And I see it within the Progressive Party too. It's a little more subtle, but it's definitely there. What's the wisdom that can get us past that one? Because I think the other ones in comparison are kind of easy.
So I think in terms of what I've seen, something that can help us, if it's not an ideological dispute, if it's about an individual person or people, a small group of people, I think, ensuring that we have strong guidelines for ethics and an independent ethics committee would help with that. A lot of the interpersonal issues that I've seen have come down to things that, we're not clear in our various organizations what the line in the sand is, and how those complaints of unethical behavior can be handled. So that may be one solution to kind of help with that.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, something to think about for the future. I think this conversation will happen again, and I'll probably be asking probably all of you at some point to come back. There are a number of people that I was hoping to bring to the table, and it didn't line up for one reason or another, including Nikita. I had asked Nick and Rod of the MPP to send somebody, and it just didn't line up in time. There are a lot of people who have various models and various tools that could really help this. If we could figure out a smart way to organize something like this, I think that all the groups could keep their autonomy, and this idea of keeping small working groups could be a real valuable thing. If the Progressive Party as it is, which is really less than 100 activists who are tightly knit and well organized within their framework, but it gets harder and harder the bigger it gets. If we can figure out a way to keep those working groups defined and still functional while interconnecting them, I think that we could really actually make the difference that I think most of us have been trying to make our entire life and working towards our entire life. Anyway, we should wrap up. This is great, and I appreciate this conversation. I want to have it as often as possible. I also don't want to overload people with too much dialogue. So in the next couple of moments, just hear from everybody. Just tell us again who you are and what you're doing, and if there's anything to add, please do it. Cait, would you go again, and don't be afraid to repeat yourself in this, and pitch your hashtag and a website and a Twitter, anything whatever is appropriate.
Yeah, so we're called the United Left. If you want to find us right now, the best place to do it is on Twitter at Our United Left is our handle. Our website is coming up on Monday, so if you go follow that Twitter, you'll see an announcement when the website is up. If you're interested in working with us, go ahead and send us a DM. They're open, and we'll get you in contact with the people in charge of that.
Right. They want to be the glue. The United Left is the glue of the idea of Party X. Akua, would you go next? I know you're in transition, and just tell us who you are, and we get you.
Yeah. Again, Akua Walters. I'm essentially working on helping the state parties to become a thing. And I mean, Cait, I think there's a lot that you can learn from Tyler as well. The United Left organization, because we have to be everything that we're doing has to be oriented around 2022. And it's along that vein that I'm working with as many local organizations around the East Coast as I can to help them to form a progressive party along the vein of Washington rather than Vermont.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you, Akua. Noah, you want to finish up and just same?
Yeah, sure. I'm Noah Martin. I'm a national delegate for the Green Party, Green Party of Washington, greenpartywashington.org is our website. And I am based in Olympia, so if you are ever down in Olympia for a protest or to testify or something like that, hit me up, I guess.
Be taking you up on that soon. All right, cool. This has been a production of Progressive Washington, hosted by the Washington State Progressive Party and Uphill Media. Many thanks to Oz behind the scenes, the man behind the curtain, making it all happen. Thanks to our guest, Cait McGinnis from the United Left, Noah Martin from the Green Party, and Akua Walters, a unaffiliated political activist and commentator. Appreciate you guys, and I would love to have you guys back for various iterations of this conversation, because my guess is it's going to be a defining theme for our lifetimes in this generation. With that, happy Juneteenth. let's take another step forward in the evolution of this culture and species. Huh? Appreciate you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.